You know that moment when you realize your entire life is about to become a battlefield? That moment when a simple hello from a neighbor turns into a declaration of war. Yeah, that's exactly what happened to me 3 months ago. And let me tell you, what started as a dispute over a phone charger ended up becoming the most elaborate, satisfying revenge story I've ever been part of. My name is Marcus. I'm a software engineer, and I just moved into what I thought would be my dream townhouse in a quiet HOA community in suburban Atlanta. Spoiler alert, it wasn't quiet for long. The first red flag should have been the 17-page HOA rulebook they handed me at closing. 17 pages for a townhouse community, but I was so excited about finally owning my own place, about having that little patch of lawn and my own parking spot, that I brushed it off. I mean, how bad could it be, right? I'd heard the HOA horror stories, sure, but those were exaggerations, weren't they? People just loved to complain about petty neighborhood drama. Well, let me tell you something. Those stories aren't exaggerations. If anything, they're understatements. My neighbor, Karen, and yes, that's actually her real name, because the universe has a twisted sense of humor, lived in the unit right next to mine. The first time I met her was on Maven Day. I was hauling boxes from my truck when she appeared on her pristine porch, arms crossed, wearing what I can only describe as HOA battle armor, a pressed polo shirt with the community logo, khaki capris, and those white sneakers that looked like they'd never touched actual grass. Her hair was cut in that signature style, you know the one. She had a clipboard. A clipboard, on a Saturday morning, that should have been my cue to turn around and drive back to my apartment. "You must be the new owner of Unit 42, she said, not as a question, but as an accusation. Like I'd committed some kind of crime by purchasing property. I smiled, trying to be friendly, and introduced myself. She didn't smile back. Instead, she informed me that she was the HOA vice president, that there were standards in this community, and that she'd be keeping an eye on things to make sure I fit in properly. Those were her exact words. Fit in properly. Like I was some kind of puzzle piece that might be the wrong shape. Over the next few weeks, I started to understand what she meant by keeping an eye on things. She watched everything, and I mean everything. If I came home 5 minutes late from work, she'd be at her window. If I took my trash out at 7:01 instead of 7 a.m. sharp, there'd be a note on my door. If my grass was a quarter-inch taller than the HOA regulation high tide, yes, they regulate grass high tide, find a violation notice in my mailbox. It was exhausting, but I tried to play nice. I followed the rules, paid my dues on time, kept my head down. I'm not a confrontational person by nature. I like solving problems with code, not conflict. Then came the incident that changed everything. It was a Tuesday evening, around 8 p.m. I'd just gotten home from a brutal day of debugging at work, and I was sitting on my small back patio, charging my phone with my portable power bank while scrolling through some documentation for a project. The patio faces a shared courtyard area, nothing fancy, just some grass and a few benches. I had my noise-canceling headphones on, completely in my own world, when I felt a tap on my shoulder that nearly made me jump out of my skin. It was Karen. Of course it was Karen. She was standing there with that same clipboard, but this time she had her phone in her other hand, and it was dead, completely drained. "I need to borrow that," she said, pointing at my charger. Not "can I borrow," not "would you mind," just a flat statement of need, like she was entitled to it. I blinked at her, confused. I'm actually using it right now," I said, trying to be polite. "My phone's almost dead too." She didn't miss a beat. "I'm the HOA vice president. I need to make an important call about community business. You can charge yours later." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Was she seriously pulling rank over a phone charger? I tried to explain that I was expecting an important work call, that I needed my phone charged for an on-call rotation I was covering. She cut me off. "As a member of this community, you have a responsibility to support HOA operations. I need that charger now." The way she said it, with such absolute certainty that she was right, made something snap inside me. Not in an angry way, but in a clarity way. I suddenly understood that this woman genuinely believed she had authority over my personal possessions. "No," I said simply. "Just no." Her face went through about 5 different shades of red in rapid succession. "Excuse me," she sputtered. I said, "No. This is my charger, my property, and I'm using it. You're welcome to go inside and charge your phone at your own house." I kept my voice level, polite, even, but firm. For a moment, she just stared at me like I'd spoken in an alien language. Then came the threat that would set everything in motion. "You're going to regret this. I'm going to make sure you regret this." And boy, did she try. The next morning, I woke up to find a violation notice on my door. Apparently, my welcome mat was non-regulation colors and violated the community aesthetic standards. The mat was gray, just plain gray. I'd literally bought it because it looked neutral, and in strike one. 2 days later, another notice: my patio furniture was improperly stored because I'd left a single folding chair unfolded overnight. Strike 2. Then came the parking violation because my car was allegedly 3 inches over the line of my assigned spot. I measured it myself with the tape measure. I was perfectly within the lines. Strike 3. But Karen wasn't done. Oh no, she was just getting started. She called an emergency HOA meeting to discuss problematic resident behavior. I wasn't named directly in the meeting notice, but several neighbors who actually liked me gave me a heads up that I was definitely the topic of discussion. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday evening, and I decided I needed to attend to defend myself. Walking into that community center room felt like walking into a courtroom where I was already guilty. Karen sat at the head table with the HOA president, a quiet older man named Bill, who seemed perpetually exhausted by Karen's antics but too tired to fight back. There were maybe 15 other residents scattered around the room, most looking bored or confused about why they were there. Karen had a PowerPoint presentation. A PowerPoint. About me. Slide 1. Maintaining community standards. Slide 2. Recent violations and concerning patterns. She proceeded to list every single tiny infraction, real or imagined, that she'd documented over the past month. But here's where it got truly unhinged. She claimed that my refusal to cooperate with leadership, meaning not giving her my charger a pattern of antisocial behavior that threatened the community cohesion. She actually suggested that the HOA should implement a new rule requiring residents to share resources when requested by board members for official business. She wanted to codify her entitlement to other people's property. The room went silent. Even Bill looked uncomfortable. That's when I raised my hand. Karen looked annoyed, but acknowledged me. I stood up and calmly explained the charger incident, exactly as it happened, leaving nothing out. I mentioned that I was on call for work, that I'd politely declined to hand over my personal property, and that I believed HOA authority didn't extend to confiscating residents' belongings. Several people actually laughed. One guy in the back muttered, "She wanted to take your charger." Seriously. Karen's face went crimson again. Bill, bless him, finally found his spine. "Karen, we can't make rules about borrowing people's personal items. That's not what an HOA does." But Karen wasn't backing down. She insisted that community cooperation was in the bylaws and that I was being deliberately obstructive. The meeting devolved into chaos, with half the room defending me and the other half just wanting to go home. Eventually, Bill adjourned the meeting without any action taken, but Karen shot me a look as I left that clearly said this wasn't over. And it wasn't. The harassment intensified. Now I was getting violation notices almost daily. My trash can was 2 inches too far from my garage. My doorbell camera was angled incorrectly. My car was too dirty for community standards after a rainstorm. Each violation came with a fine. $50, $75, $100. They were adding up fast. I paid the first few, thinking maybe if I just complied, she'd back off. But it became clear that compliance wasn't the goal. Punishment was the goal. That's when I decided enough was enough. I'm a software engineer, remember, I solve problems. And Karen had just become my most interesting problem to solve. I started researching HOA law in Georgia, reading through our community bylaws with a fine-tooth comb, looking for vulnerabilities, loopholes, anything I could use. And oh boy, did I find some interesting things. Our HOA was structured like most. A board of directors, regular meetings, financial reports, election procedures. But here's the thing about organizations run by volunteers with minimal oversight. They get sloppy. I submitted a formal request for HOA financial records, which under Georgia law, I was entitled to review as a homeowner. Karen tried to deny the request, claiming they were confidential, but I cited the specific statute. Bill overruled her, and a week later, I had access to 3 years of financial documents. I spent an entire weekend going through spreadsheets, bank statements, meeting minutes, and expense reports. And that's when I found it, the irregularities. Nothing massive or clearly illegal, but definitely questionable. There were expenses labeled vaguely as community improvements with no supporting documentation. Payments to vendors who didn't seem to exist when I Googled them. Small amounts, $50 here, $100 there, but over 3 years, it added up to several $1,000s that couldn't be properly accounted for. Most suspiciously, many of these expenses were approved by Karen alone, without full board votes recorded in the minutes. Now I want to be clear, I'm not accusing anyone of embezzlement. It's possible these were legitimate expenses that were just poorly documented, but the lack of proper documentation was itself a violation of the HOA's own financial procedures as outlined in the bylaws. And I had an idea for how to use this information, not to destroy anyone, but to create leverage, to automate my revenge in a way that was completely legal, totally justified, and absolutely systematic. First, I needed allies. I reached out to several neighbors who'd expressed frustration with Karen's reign of terror. Turns out, I wasn't the only one she'd been targeting. There was Jennifer, who got fined because her daughter left a bicycle on the lawn. Mike, who got violations for parking his work van overnight even though he'd gotten prior approval. The Johnsons, who were cited for having excessive garden decorations when they put up a single bird feeder. We formed a little coalition, and I showed them what I'd found in the financial records. The plan was simple but elegant. We would attend every single HOA meeting going forward. All of us, we'd follow every rule, cite every bylaw, and demand accountability on every single issue. But here's the beautiful part. I created a system. I built a custom app, nothing fancy, just a simple web application that I hosted on my personal server. The app did several things. It tracked all HOA communications, violations, and deadlines. It automatically generated formal responses to any violation notice, complete with photo evidence and bylaw citations. It sent reminders to our coalition about meetings and votes. It maintained a database of every rule Karen had enforced inconsistently. But the real genius was the automation. Every time I received a violation notice, my app would automatically generate and submit 3 things. First, a formal challenge to the violation with supporting evidence. Second, a request for documentation of similar violations issued to other residents to prove consistent enforcement. And third, a separate formal complaint about any procedural irregularity I'd identified in recent HOA business. What used to take me hours of work now took 30 seconds. Karen wanted to bury me in paperwork. Fine, I'd bury her right back, but I'd do it with code. The next HOA meeting was something special. Our entire coalition showed up, which was unusual because typically only 5 or 6 people attended these things. Karen looked nervous the moment she saw us all walk in. I'd prepared a formal agenda item request, which under the bylaws, she had to add to the meeting. Review of financial documentation procedures and compliance. Bill looked confused but added it to the agenda. When we got to that item, I stood up with a printed presentation of my own. I didn't accuse anyone of wrongdoing. I simply presented a detailed analysis of financial record-keeping practices compared to the HOA's own bylaws and Georgia state requirements for nonprofit corporations. I highlighted gaps in documentation, inconsistencies in approval processes, and suggested that the HOA adopt stronger financial controls to protect both the board and the residents. I proposed mandatory quarterly financial reviews, requiring 2 board signatures on all expenses over $25, and digitizing all records for transparency. The room was silent when I finished. Bill looked relieved. I think he'd been worried I was going to blow up the meeting with accusations. Instead, I'd been professional, thorough, and constructive. Karen tried to dismiss it as unnecessary bureaucracy, but several other residents spoke up supporting the proposals. They'd been worried about financial management too, but hadn't known how to raise the issue. By the end of the meeting, Bill called for a vote on implementing my suggested financial controls. It passed unanimously, with Karen abstaining but unable to vote against it without looking suspicious. That was just the beginning. Over the next month, every violation notice Karen sent me got the full automated treatment. She cited me for my grass height. I responded with photos timestamped with metadata showing the grass was exactly regulation height, along with a request for the calibration records of the measuring device used and copies of all other grass height violations issued that week. She claimed my trash can was out too early. I submitted security camera footage showing the exact time I'd placed it out, along with timestamped photos of 3 other units with their cans out earlier. The best part was that I wasn't even spending much time on this anymore. My app did 90% of the work. It was like having a lawyer on retainer who worked for free and never slept. Karen, on the other hand, was drowning. Every challenge I submitted required her to respond, to gather evidence, to document her enforcement actions. She was spending hours on work that my code did in seconds. I'd automated the revenge, and she couldn't keep up, but I didn't stop there. Remember those inconsistent enforcement patterns I'd been tracking? I started filing formal complaints every time. I noticed Karen enforcing a rule against one person but not another. Mrs. Chen's garden gnome got a violation, but the house 3 doors down had 4 gnomes. I filed a complaint citing selective enforcement. Someone got dinged for a dirty car, but Karen's own car had visible mud on it. Complaint filed with photo evidence. I wasn't breaking any rules. I was just demanding that the rules be applied fairly and consistently, which was literally in the HOA bylaws. The coalition started using the app, too. I'd given them all access. And suddenly, Karen was facing a coordinated response every time she issued a questionable violation. The app would alert everyone. We'd document the situation, and whoever was affected would get an automatically generated response package. It was beautiful. We'd turned her own weapon bureaucratic harassment against her, but we'd made it efficient. We were out carrying the Karen. The breaking point came about 6 weeks into Operation Automated Revenge. Karen called another emergency meeting, this time to address what she called harassment of HOA leadership. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. She stood up and delivered this impassioned speech about how the board was being overwhelmed with frivolous challenges and complaints that were making it impossible to do their jobs. She looked exhausted. There were bags under her eyes. Her usually perfect hair was slightly disheveled. I let her finish, then calmly raised my hand. Karen, every challenge I've submitted has been based on either inconsistent rule enforcement or procedural questions about HOA operations. If answering legitimate questions from homeowners is overwhelming, perhaps the issue isn't the questions but the processes. Bill nodded slowly. I continued, I'd like to propose a solution. What if we implemented a digital system for violation notices and challenges? Standardized forms, automatic tracking, transparent records. It would make everything more efficient for everyone. What I was really proposing was to make the entire system work like my app. Standardized, documented, accountable. Karen tried to argue against it, but other residents loved the idea. They were tired of the drama. They wanted a system that was fair and didn't require showing up to meetings to fight about trash cans. Bill put it to a vote. It passed, 11-3. Karen voted against it, along with her two closest allies on the board. Over the next 2 months, I helped the HOA implement a digital management system. I didn't push my own app, that would have been a conflict of interest, but I made sure whatever system they chose had all the features needed for transparency and accountability. Every violation notice now required photo evidence. Every challenge had a standardized review process. All enforcement actions were logged in a database that any homeowner could access. The system made it almost impossible to play favorites or target someone unfairly. Karen hated it. She fought it at every step. But Bill had finally had enough of her antics. He supported the new system fully, and with my coalition backing it, we had the votes. The transformation was remarkable. Violation notices dropped by 70% almost immediately, because now people had to justify and document everything. The violations that were issued were legitimate and fairly enforced. The whole community became more peaceful. But here's the truly satisfying part. Remember those financial controls I proposed? The ones requiring 2 signatures and better documentation. Well, once those were implemented and we started digitizing old records, some interesting patterns became clear. Nothing criminal, but it turned out Karen had been approving payments to her nephew's landscaping company for emergency tree trimming, at rates about 30% higher than market value. Again, not illegal, but definitely an ethical problem. Bill called a special meeting to address it. Karen tried to defend it, saying her nephew gave us a family discount and did quality work. But when we showed documentation that we'd paid more than 2 other landscaping companies charged for similar work, and that these contracts had been approved without competitive bidding as required by the bylaws, she couldn't explain it away. Bill asked for her resignation as vice president. She refused. So we held a recall vote. It wasn't even close. She was removed from the board by a vote of 31-5. The best moment came about a week after her removal. I was sitting on my patio again, in the evening, charging my phone with the same portable charger that had started this whole war. Karen walked past the courtyard, saw me, and our eyes met. For a second, I thought she might say something, maybe yell at me or make one last threat. Instead, she just looked away and kept walking. She looked smaller, somehow, defeated. I didn't feel triumphant or vindictive. I just felt relief. It was over. Here's the thing about revenge, especially automated revenge. The best kind isn't about destruction. It's about creating systems that prevent the behavior you're fighting against. I didn't ruin Karen's life. I didn't get her arrested or cost her money. I just made it impossible for her to continue abusing a small amount of power to make other people miserable. I built a system that forced accountability, and that system protected not just me, but everyone in the community. The HOA is actually pleasant now. Bill is still president, and he's doing a great job with the new systems in place. We elected a new vice president, Jennifer, the mom who'd been fined for her daughter's bicycle. She's fair, reasonable, and actually interested in building community rather than enforcing petty rules. Violation notices are rare and always justified. People follow the reasonable rules and ignore the absurd ones, and nobody makes a big deal about it. As for me, I still live in Unit 42. My grass is regulation height, not because I'm afraid of violations, but because I actually like how the lawn looks when it's maintained. My welcome mat is still gray. My patio furniture sits out, folded or unfolded as I please. And my phone charger, it's mine. Always has been, always will be. Nobody's ever asked to borrow it again, which is fine by me. The app I built is still running. Actually, I open sourced the code and put it on GitHub with a guide for other HOA residents who might be dealing with similar situations. It's been downloaded a few hundred times, and I get occasional emails from people thanking me for creating a tool that helped them fight back against their own petty tyrants. That feels good, knowing that my solution to one problem is helping other people solve theirs. I learned a lot from this experience. I learned that sometimes the people with the smallest amount of power abuse it the most, maybe because it's the only power they have. I learned that the best way to fight bureaucracy is with better bureaucracy, with systems that are transparent and fair. And I learned that revenge doesn't have to be about getting even or making someone suffer. The best revenge is building something that makes the bad behavior impossible to continue. Karen still lives next door. We don't talk, but we're not enemies. We just exist in the same space, politely ignoring each other. Sometimes I see her watching from her window when I come home from work, and I wonder what she's thinking. Does she regret how things went down? Does she think she was justified? I'll never know. And honestly, I don't really care. She's not my problem anymore. The system handles problems now, fairly and automatically. If you're dealing with a similar situation in HOA nightmare, a petty tyrant neighbor, someone who thinks they have authority over you that they don't actually have, here's my advice. Document everything. Know your rights, build alliances, and create systems. Don't just fight back. Build something that makes the fight unnecessary. Use whatever skills you have, whether that's coding like me, organizing, legal research, or just persistence. And remember, the goal isn't to destroy anyone. It's to create a situation where everyone, including your adversary, has to play by fair rules. My townhouse is my home now, truly. Not just the building, but the community. It took a war over a phone charger to get here, but it was worth it. Every time I sit on my patio, charging my phone, enjoying the evening air without looking over my shoulder, I'm reminded that sometimes you have to fight for peace. And sometimes, the best weapon in that fight isn't anger or aggression. It's just good code and better systems. That's the revenge that lasts. The kind that makes things better for everyone, even the people you're fighting against. So yeah, Karen said I owed her my charger. She was wrong, but in a weird way, I owe her something else. The motivation to build something useful, to stand up for myself and others, and to prove that intelligence and preparation beat petty tyranny every single time. Thanks, Karen. Couldn't have done it without you.